Welcome to Real People, Real Voices. I'm your host, James Jackson.
I'm your co-host, Pastor Wayne Moore.
Always good to host with you.
It is, man. It's good to see you, man. Look good in that body shirt. Flex for me for a moment, Jack.
Well, it's all about faith and fitness. So,
yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to see you and enjoying your show each morning.
Well, thank you so much. I hope I'm being productive and saying some things that need to be said. Thank you so much.
It's Coffee with Reverend Dr. Moore.
Yeah. Some mornings we have coffee together after we have prayer because we watch you a little bit and then we go into our show.
Yeah. So speaking of shows, we got a great show today with some great guests. I want to thank our sponsors.
Yes, Lee Corso and Crawley are with us. We have not only that, Isles Modern Clothing and Shoes. We have Fort McCray Christian Academy. Remember that one, you all, where you can train your child up in the way that they should go. And the Marion County Public Health Department is always with us. Happy to have all of our sponsors.
Absolutely. I want to also make sure that everybody goes to our YouTube channel, WHMB TV 40. You can watch shows there that you might have missed.
Mm-hmm. And like us on Facebook.
Yeah. So we've got some folks there, and we thank you all for being a part of what we do. A lot going on. That's the reason why we're doing the show like we're doing it. Certainly, this is probably not new to many of you all who are in our viewing audience with these Zoom meetings. We've got some wonderful guests going to be joining us, 3 tremendous men of God, and men are going to be coming on to talk with us about some of the things that are happening. Dr. Moore, we're excited about the program.
I'm excited about it. I think a strong community is a well-informed community. And I think that's what we're about to do today is give some information about what's happening throughout the total country, but also in our circumference. We're going to talk about that today.
All right. Coming up in just a little bit, we got Dr. David Green, Pastor Janelle Howard, and Gregory Merriweather. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. I'm your host, James Jackson. Welcome to Real People, Real Voices. And Dr. Moore, if you would, please introduce our guests.
First of all, we have Pastor Darnell Howard, who's the pastor of the Hovey Street Church of God in Christ. We also have Brother Merriweather, Gregory Merriweather, who is a community activist. Not only that, but he's done quite a bit of work throughout the city of Indianapolis as it relates to some of the unrest that has been taking place. And then we have Concerned Clergy President, also the pastor of Purpose of Life Ministries, Dr. David Green. And so we're going to have a great show today, Pastor Jackson.
I think so. And gentlemen, thank you for being with us on today. We certainly want to get your insight. Let's start with Dr. Green. Your perspective on some of the things that we see going on in our community with regard to all the protesting.
Well, first of all, thank you, Pastor Jackson. Thank you, Pastor Moore, for inviting me to be a part of Real Voices, Real People. We would just like to say from the onset that from the African-American community, it's been a lot of frustration for decades now. And we're just kind of seeing that play out, not only here in Indianapolis, but across our state and across our country. There's a lot of unrest because of things that haven't been addressed in terms of public safety, in terms of criminal justice reform. People are gravely concerned and they want changes, and they've been looking for these changes for years. And so they're frustrated. And so you're seeing that frustration play out. Dr. King in his speech, The Other America, said a riot is the voice of the unheard. And you have people that feel like they've not been heard, and they're now voicing their concerns.
And Pastor Howard, a lot of this, of course, peaceful protesting that have evolved into violence in the evening time, so much so that we've had to have curfew. You've been on the front lines of all of this. What do you see going on? Has this been effective? And what is your perspective on the rioting that has followed the peaceful protest?
Well, let me say initially, I'm definitely glad to be here on the show with you guys and with the two guests. Always, again, good to be in the presence of gentlemen who at least have their pulse on the city and at least are speaking and articulating informed decisions and informed conversations. I would say when you look at some of these protests, when you look at some of the things that are happening, people just, as Dr. Green pointed out in reference to Dr. King, people want to be heard and they need to be heard. And so some people have decided the best way to get heard is to cause some damage. I'm not going to shun what they've done in totality. People want to be heard. People want things changed. No one wants to live in a community where the police can just murder or abuse without any retribution or any consequences. So while I'm not totally for tearing up stuff, but hey, if that's the way you feel you need to be heard, I'm not going to condemn anybody. People need to pay attention to the real issues and stop trying to defer to that. The real issue is we have a police action shooting that hasn't been addressed properly based, if you listen to the community. The real issue is we have a little girl who got 5-point-something million views on being assaulted by the police. We haven't addressed that. We haven't addressed the real issue that we got rogue police. Either they're rogue police or they're under the command of the chief. They're doing things that we don't believe should be done to our people in our community.
And Greg, you've got an inside perspective, if you will, having done work with the chief, Chief Roach, the outgoing chief, Chief Taylor, the current chief for IMPD, acting as a liaison for the police department. So you can kind of see it both ways, your perspective on all this.
My perspective on this, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on with all these gentlemen because I think it's great that we can share this dialogue. My perspective, from being a person who's been on both sides of the coin, is pretty challenging because when it's all said and done, when I went inside IMPD, I went inside to bring the visual of the people into IMPD so that IMPD can have the opportunity to hear from someone who has been on the opposite side of them, and then address the issues and bring change that would pretty much bridge the gap between our communities and IMPD. Do I think I was successful in that? I think at some point I was finding some success, but I think some things have changed since then. And right now, I think that IMPD, if I had to look at anyone making a severe change or an immediate change, I would say IMPD needs to get on board with making an immediate change.
Going back to the initial question that Brother Jackson asked, I want to add in conjunction to that. In the last 12 days, 10, 12 days, is any progress in from your views been made?
From my perspective, I think that I won't call it progress. I will call it awareness, because when I think about some of the things that people have called progress, I don't think they should have been happening anyway. I think that we have situations where we don't pay attention until it happens again. And I hope that this is not a situation where we get lulled and all of a sudden listen to the voices of people who may be impacted by the change. One thing that is for sure is if we're impacted by the change, this may change the perspective of some people's jobs and some people's resources. And I think that's why you're starting to see some people be involved in this movement. But definitely, I think that awareness has definitely been brought back to the table. But real change, I think it's going to take a little bit more to see what I would call real change.
Dr. Howard. I'm sorry, Brother Jackson. Go ahead, Brother Jackson.
Go ahead, Brother Jackson.
We've got a break coming up here in about a minute, and certainly want to hear Pastor Howard's insight on this, but we don't want you to have to start and then stop. And of course, we also want to deal with Black Lives Matters, and some other organizations are advocating for defunding and dismantling police departments. Minneapolis, they're working on that. They've got council members who say that they're ready to do that. Camden, New Jersey, I think they've done something similar back in 2015. We'd certainly like to start with you, Pastor Howard, when we come back from break, and then Dr. Green, to touch on the viability of, or even the feasibility of doing such a thing. This is Real People, Real Voices with Dr. Moore. Pastor Jackson will be back after this. Welcome back to Real People, Real Voices. I'm James Jackson.
And I'm Pastor Wayne Moore, co-host.
And Dr. Moore, just before the break, you had a question that I'd like for you to refresh, directed at Pastor Donnell Howard.
I think the question basically was, how do you feel about the progress that is being made? And if there is any progress? Apparently, Mr. Merriweather said, talked about awareness, which suggests to me that he doesn't see the progress. But if I look through your optic view, what do I see?
I think it may not be popular, but I'm going to say when they were worried about it being burned down, there was some sincere, quick things being done. I think they're starting to give us fluffy stuff now because they've sort of quieted the frustration. So in terms of progress, I think we haven't had the progress that the people are looking for. They've just been saying some stuff more. It's just, I don't think there's been any progress is what I'm saying.
All right, Dr. Green.
I would like to add that we really need to see action. I mean, I get conversations, et cetera, but for decades, we've had these conversations. The data is out there concerning every issue that we need to address that we've been talking about for years. When are we going to see concrete actions to drive change? And I'm of the persuasion that when we want to do something, we can get it done. In this city and even across this country, when we wanted to do something, it did not take 2 years to get a stimulus package. We got it done. So why can't we move to get criminal justice reform done? Not talked about, debated, caught up in a bunch of group meetings where people, document, get paid for documenting, but there is no concrete actions to address the issues. That's what we need in this season, not all this fluff stuff that doesn't address the core issues of what's driving these protests.
And let me ask the three of you all, with regard to reform and change, IMPD, as we understand it, have revised use of force policies 2016. Chief Roach talked about revision of policies. If you could touch on that, and then how do you deal with police officers who you may have policies in place like they did in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the things that they were doing, they were prohibited to do by department policy, but they were doing it anyway. So how do we overcome that?
Fire them immediately. If whatever they do doesn't line with the policy, they should be fired immediately, especially when it endangers the lives of people in the community, when it takes the lives of people in the community, when it alters the lives of people in the community, when it grossly affects the lives of the people in the community. If they're not following the policy, they should be fired immediately. Now, policy reform, I let the other guys who are way smarter than me deal with that. But what I say is if they violate the policy, fired immediately and charged.
What I would like to add to Pastor Howard's comment is in order to make this happen, we're going to have to look at the FOP contract. And that's it, that's in place. Our community needs to be allowed to give input to that contract. It needs to be something that becomes very transparent so we know what's in the contract. But that is something that has to be addressed because not only in Indianapolis, but across the country, if the FOP is going to defend every one of these shootings. And so in a lot of situations, there's limitations. And those limitations need to be addressed by looking at that FOP contract.
Greg Marriott.
When I look at it, I agree with both pastors. The other thing is, I think that the mentality of IMPD has to be analyzed because when you look at even the things that have happened here with the shooting, the thing that happened with the young ladies in the city, we have seen those officers, even the one that used bad verbiage, we've seen those officers be moved somewhere else without the community even knowing where they are or who they are. And I think that my question to that is, how is that good for public safety? It may be good for officer safety, but how is that good for public safety when you have these officers and you're moving them with nobody in the community knowing their name or where they are? And I think that says a lot about the mentality of the leadership, not even of the FOP, but the leadership of IMPD. So at that point, I think there needs to be a heavy analysis on the mentality of the leadership that is supposedly serving the community.
Dr. Moore, in the Aaron Bailey case, we saw a recommendation for termination from the mayor,
Mhm.
and then Chief Roach pretty quickly. In this instance with Deshaun Reed, we have not seen pretty much anything from the mayor's office except for delegating this to federal authorities. And we do now have a special prosecutor. I perceive that we might not see a prosecution because of some of the facts that we have heard about. We haven't actually been able to read anything. What do you think's going on here?
Who, me?
Yeah.
I really think that the city needs to brace itself again. I've seen how they have diffused, I don't call it a riot, but the rebellion that has taken place. People call it a riot and rebellion. I call it a rebellion. I think the city needs to brace itself because when you look at the Aaron Bailey case, God rest his soul, and we still send condolences to that family. FOP president was up every week in the news media talking about police officers and things of that nature. Not every week, every other week. He's nowhere around now. He's nowhere around, and that's frightening to me as a citizen. So that's why I'm bracing myself because you just said it, Brother Jackson. There might be a possibility we might not even get that conviction. And so I'm bracing ourselves, but they're doing a massive job on the demonstrations. It was almost like a party out there Saturday, I believe. And so I guess they feel they got the city under control. And then there is no documentation, nothing that suggests police reform. Nothing. We're hearing nothing about police reform. I thought one of these fellas would be on the excessive force board. But apparently you guys are not friends with the administration. And so I'm praying for you. But all I'm saying in that context, I have to agree with you, Brother Jackson, my co-host, that the city needs to brace itself because yes.
We're just about out of time, Dr. Moore. And Danelle, if in fact what we perceive happens where there is no prosecution because of the details in the case, will the protest leaders be able to keep things under control?
If there's no prosecution, the city better brace themselves in the nice words that Dr. Moore said, because people are tired. I mean, cause you guys know people are tired of rogue police officers. If, as Greg said, if this is not the mentality of the police department, if that mentality doesn't promote this, then people are tired of the police brutalizing their people, murdering their people. And so you're going to get a response that I don't know that we're ready to receive. But I think that the community itself, I think we got to stop separating the protesters from the community, because the protesters are the community and the community are the protesters. It's the community that's saying we're tired of this. They're trying to say it's outside agitators, but it's the community that's saying we are tired of this. So I don't know, Dr. Jackson. I think in the words of Pastor Moore, they better brace themselves and make sure they get the right thing done and the right thing said.
We're out of time. Final comments, Gregory Merriweather?
I just want to say, man, I just hope that the people who are out here utilizing their voices continue to use their voices. Be strong, be diligent, and don't allow anything but equality to be the thing on the table in all facets, in all ways, in every day of life for Black people. Equality is the only thing that should be accepted at the end of all of this.
Dr. Green, being a pastor, what can you say to kind of help people as we process through all this?
Well, I mean, I just want to say that it's time for change. And if we don't get it now, we won't get it. We as a people have to stand. I'm glad that we're seeing it be multicultural in nature. This is a problem that clearly needs to be addressed.
All right, Dr. Moore, thanks again for
Thank
co-hosting.
you, my brother. It's good to be with you. Good to see you. You know that.
Likewise. And thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you. We'll be back. Rundown. Welcome back to Real People, Real Voices. I'm James Jackson, your host.
And I'm Pastor Wayne Moore, your co-host. So our rundown, Brother Jackson.
Yeah, and I thought we had a pretty good dialogue there with our guest.
I think we did too. I think we needed a little more time to
Absolutely.
that subject matter it demands some more time. I really like the question you asked. How should we look forward based on your analyzation of what you saw? It doesn't look like things are going to turn out the way the community would like for them to turn out. And I'm just basically telling our city that we need to brace ourselves. How do you feel about that?
Well, you have due process, and having served on the merit board for 4 years, I just don't perceive that there's going to be a prosecution in this particular case. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it at this point. The fact that the mayor and the chief hasn't recommended termination would lead me to believe that there probably won't be that.
Mm-hmm. And that's based on experience, and you have some great experience with the merit board. You needed to be commended for that.
Thank you.
But I think in many cases, I think we need to brace ourselves. I think, it was a question you asked. I don't know how many seconds we got or minutes that you asked about all of these groups coming in.
Yeah.
As it relates to Black Lives Matter, Faith Indiana? Indiana, and all of that. But all of those, the only people that are really asking the questions are the Black Lives Matter people. I don't get a lot out of Faith Indiana. What about you? How do you perceive Faith Indiana's approach?
Well, I think we got to come up with another show because we're out of time for this one. But I would love to. We really need to talk about Faith in Indiana so people can know what it's really all about.
Right, I think we do, yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.